There is just so much misinformation about graduate school that gets disseminated. And if you believe this misinformation or you internalize these lies as truths, then it can fundamentally impact your ability to get into graduate school, and even worse, impact your ability to succeed as a graduate student. So today we are debunking 10 myths about graduate school. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about everything grad life, grad advice, and research. And in today's video, we are debunking 10 major myths about graduate school. And the first myth that just gets right under my skin is that people say PhD programs are fully funded. In the simplest form, that is just not true. PhD programs are not fully funded. And talking with my professors, it seems like they haven't been fully funded for years. But somehow this lie keeps getting disseminated to undergrads who don't know any better, or graduate students who believe them, and then ultimately sets them up for failure. I know for me, when I was applying to graduate school, I wholeheartedly thought if you get an offer to a PhD program, you don't have to worry about funding it. Then I accepted my offer to a PhD program and ended up with absolutely no funding. And that has been the bane of my existence for my PhD program experience. So I'm bringing this myth as my number one myth because it is so important to be prepared to not be offered any money or have to work through your graduate program. Especially now as tuition is becoming more and more expensive, graduate programs can't even necessarily afford tuition. So it's very advantageous for you as a graduate student to plan ahead, to be prepared, to apply to external funding, and to not expect much support from your graduate program. And if you do get support, then that's even better. But depending on your graduate school to pay for your grad school is not the reality of most graduate students now in 2021. The next myth is that people think you have to have a perfect GPA to get into graduate school. And that's just not true. For most graduate programs, generally, the application is very holistic. And so there's a variety of different types of GPAs that are able to get into a graduate program. Now, I know some programs are more competitive than others, especially if you're trying to get into med school, but generally you can expect getting into grad school being about more than just having a 3.8 or a 4.0 GPA. You need to be able to demonstrate that you have the skills, the drive, the understanding of focus on what you want to do and how this program will help you and how you fit into this program. Getting into grad school is a lot more complex than just being smart and not smart. It's about who you are as a researcher or who you are as a scholar and how this program can support you to reach your goals. Which leads to my next myth, and that is people think you have to have a perfectly thought out, planned out research proposal for when you are applying to a graduate program. Now, maybe this is the case for programs outside of the US because their PhD programs function a little bit differently. But in the United States, specifically in a humanities PhD program, when you are applying to graduate school, they kind of expect your research project to change throughout the course of your PhD. So it's kind of ridiculous to expect an up-and-coming research student to just know everything and every problem. The whole point about a PhD program in the US is to be trained into becoming a scholar. And so you don't know what you don't know. And they just want to know that you are asking good questions, that you are thinking like a scholar, and that you have analytical skills. They don't expect you to have all of the answers or everything figured out because that would kind of make the graduate program useless. So when you're applying to your graduate program, try to think out as much as you can about your research proposal. Try to be as thought out and strategic about what you put in your application, but don't be married to what you put into your graduate application because it'll change your first year, it'll change your third year, it might even definitely change once you've passed your qualifying exams and entering into your fieldwork. Your research proposal, your research project, your graduate experience is supposed to change as you change because you're getting more information and you're learning. Another common myth that ultimately leads to being an added barrier to graduate school is that a lot of people think in order to be eligible or to be competitive for a PhD program, you have to have a master's. And that's just not a reality. Many, if not many, most PhD programs don't actually care if you have a master's. In some cases, it can help you move through the program faster, but it doesn't necessarily make you a less competitive applicant. If a PhD program requires you to have a master's, but you don't have a master's, oftentimes they have an integrated program. Our department at UCLA certainly does. And basically the way it works is your first 2 years are your coursework years while you are building up towards your master project, be it a capstone, a thesis, a syllabus, a set of exams. You are also simultaneously building up towards your PhD. So it's kind of like more bang for your buck, or feeding a flock of birds with one loaf of bread. It's going and happening at the same time simultaneously. And let's face it, master programs are pretty expensive and also very hard to fund. So waiting to get a master's or making yourself get a master's before getting your PhD can lead to additional debt or prolonging your PhD process in a way that isn't necessary. Another thing that I've realized is a lot of people think you have to get a PhD in the same discipline or same field you got your undergraduate degrees. I studied art history and international studies when I was in undergrad. My degree is in culture and performance. I have never in my life taken a single performance course before my PhD program. You are not confined to your disciplinary silos of your undergrad program. I mean, we're all human. As we grow and live life and expand our horizons, we may discover new interests. Or maybe in undergrad, we didn't take it serious and only focused on this one thing because it seemed reasonable or pragmatic. And now you want to explore and spread your wings and fly into something amazing. Totally allowable in the PhD program. All you have to do is demonstrate that you know what you're talking about. It helps to have a degree that's related, but it doesn't completely disqualify you, and I don't even think it hurts. In some cases, it can even make you look more competitive because you will bring in new, unique perspectives that may move the discipline forward in a way that somebody who stayed in that discipline just can't. Another part of graduate school is that people think it's so much harder than undergrad. And the reality is it's completely different than undergrad, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's so much harder. Now, if you want more nitty-gritty details about the differences of undergrad and graduate school, or what makes graduate school so much harder, check out my past 2 videos. But what I will say in this video is grad school is just different. It's not necessarily harder, it's just different. You're doing different research, you're producing different work, you're engaging in different types of interactions and faculty-student relationships, and that can feel really, really awkward. But once you get a hang of it, just like when you were an undergrad, you learn to work through it. And I think a lot of what makes graduate school hard is that we hype it up, or we think about ways that it's hard, or we convince ourselves that we're not good enough and that we're not smart enough, when in reality that's not necessary. If you succeeded in undergrad, you can succeed in graduate school. And directly related to that myth is that people think you have to pull a ton of all-nighters and that you never sleep in graduate school, and all we become is academic zombies that just read and read and read. But that's not true. I don't like reading. I do like sleeping. I would never give up sleeping to read. And I know that doesn't sound like the most perfect graduate student, but hey, that's who I am and that's what I'm doing, and I think I'm doing pretty okay. Graduate school is only as strenuous or as tortuous as you let it be. Developing strong boundaries, implementing reading strategies, and working with your cohort and your faculty to build a healthy work and school and life balance is one way to make graduate school way more manageable. It doesn't have to be this zombified academic reality that a lot of people push. And I've learned from my experience, it is 100% about your boundaries, what you can and cannot handle, and the support system that you develop. Something that I'm always preaching on this channel is that you need to talk to people and you need to work together so you can have a good graduate experience. And so this next myth is one that fundamentally changes your graduate experience, and that's thinking that everyone is a competition. You don't have to be in competition with the people you're in graduate school. Your degree doesn't disqualify another person's degree, and their degree doesn't disqualify your degree. You all working together to help each other graduate is a way to build a healthy work environment both in graduate school and postgraduate school. Now, I understand some faculty or departments or programs really breed that competitive nature, but you can work closely with your cohort to make a decision together that you're not going to let that get into your head. You're not going to let faculty pin you all against each other or make you feel like you're insignificant because you didn't get this funding, or this funding makes you better than somebody else because they didn't get that funding. But instead, working together to help everyone get as much funding as possible, or get as much time doing guest lectures or going to conferences or anything positive, really. Working together and everybody succeeding in your program really does help everyone. It makes your faculty look like better mentors. It makes your department look like a stronger, more academically sound department. And then it gives you a network of scholars that are well versed in their field and are entering into the workforce as a community to support you all in the next steps of life. And honestly, the reason the myth of competition even began is because a lot of people started to spread this myth that once you get a PhD, you can't get hired anywhere. And that's just so not real. If you have a PhD, you can still do any job that you were going to do with just an undergraduate or a master's degree. So a PhD doesn't disqualify any of your previous degrees or experiences. And if you appear overqualified on your resume for certain jobs, you could just remove it off of your resume and get that job if that's the case. But the reality is, jobs really aren't that scarce. Now, if your only goal of getting a PhD is to become a professor, well, that becomes a lot more competitive, right? There's just not that many professorships. A lot of people don't want to retire. They're really good gigs. Tenure, it's hard to fire people. And so a lot of universities and a lot of faculty kind of stay where they're at and don't hire young academics yet. But the harsh reality is, as morbid as it sounds, these academic professionals that have been holding these seats for literally 60 years are kind of getting close to their end. So if they're not retiring, other things are taking them out. So one, positions will start to eventually start to open, but two, professorships aren't the only jobs that PhD students can get. You can work for the government, you can become a freelancer, you can do independent research in a variety of different places. You can get paid really well to become an entrepreneur, work for a nonprofit, or there's just so many places that people with a PhD can work. So while I understand that for some people it may not be worth the trouble, the time, the money, that's completely reasonable. But to say that you won't get hired or it's completely useless is just a complete myth. PhD programs do lead to people getting hired. If it's the perfect job or your dream job, now that's a little bit more difficult to ascertain if that's true or false. But you can and you will get a job once you get a PhD, as long as you keep trying. And myth number 10 is that some people just aren't cut out for PhDs. I just think that is such a complete farce. If you are somebody who wants to get a PhD and it is your passion, it is your dream, it is what you want, you are cut out to get a PhD. There are a lot of things throughout a PhD graduate process that are barriers for a variety of reasons. Being low income, being first generation, being a person of color, being a woman, having a disability. The list goes on and on and on. And that's because the academic and education system within the United States is 1,000,000,000% based off of hierarchies. It was constructed in such a way to keep some people out and other people's in, but that doesn't mean that you can't succeed. The metrics that are used to define what is a valuable graduate student oftentimes skew towards biased, stereotypical misconceptions on what is a good academic. It's not always going to be an easy process, but if it is something that you want, if it is something that you are passionate about and that you're willing to fight for, then you can do it. And if it's not worth it to you, then yeah, it's okay if it's not for you because you're making that decision. But I don't think you should let the ivory tower or other people determine if you are valuable enough to get a PhD. Only you can decide that. And really the question isn't, are you good enough for a PhD, but is a PhD good enough for you? But of course, all of those decisions are kind of hard to make if you don't know much about graduate school. So if you're interested in more grad life, grad advice, and everything research, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, if you found at least 2 of these myths debunked, hit a thumbs up so others know that this has good quality content. And as always, if you have questions, video suggestions, or just want to say hi, leave a comment down below. Your support really, really helps a small YouTuber like me continue to grow. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.